help but wonder where I'm bound, where I'm bound. Can't help but wonder where I'm bound.
Hello, everyone. I am Rebecca Rusch, and welcome to What's the Rush podcast, where world renowned leaders like our amazing guests today will share transformative insights that they've discovered kind of in life's quietest moments. From the peaks of achievement and the depths of challenge, we will dive into and reveal the profound and intimate wisdom that emerges maybe not in the spotlight, but in the moments of stillness and reflection. And today's conversation takes us into the intersection of science, nature, human transformation. I am such a super fan of Florence Williams. She is a science writer, and she has spent her whole life exploring a really deceptively simple concept and question of what happens to our minds and our bodies and our spirits when we go outside. From her earliest days as a Girl Scout brownie, me too, Florence, to becoming one of our most celebrated science journalists, Florence has pursued the question with so much scientific rigor, but also profound personal curiosity. Her landmark book, one of my favorite books, The Nature Fix, doesn't just confirm what poets and philosophers have known for centuries, that nature heals us. It reveals the fascinating neuroscience behind why. And through her research, she's discovered that even small doses of nature can lower our stress hormones, boost creativity, and even reduce crime rates in urban neighborhoods. Her journey has taken her across the globe through cypress-scented forests in Japan, where she investigated forest bathing, to remote islands of Finland, where she explored how natural environments reshape neural pathways. She is a contributing editor to Outside and a writer for publications like National Geographic, New York Times, The Atlantic. She's become our guide to understanding the hidden connections between environment and well-being. But here's what makes Florence's work particularly relevant to our exploration of shedding armor and finding stillness here on What's the Rush. It's her new book that I consumed recently and love it. It's called Heartbreak, A Personal and Scientific Journey. And when her 25-year marriage ended unexpectedly, Florence did what really few people would think to do. She turned her journalist eye into her own healing process and really kind of studied herself and studied her own grief and what was going on in her body with this trauma. And the result is such a profound investigation into both the science of emotional pain and the natural world's power to heal it. It's an award-winning book, and it shows us how nature can be our greatest ally in times of transformation. Florence's impact extends far beyond her writing. She's also a keynote speaker with Google, Smithsonian. She hosted 2 award-winning Audible original series. She serves on the board of the Trust for Public Land. And Wall Street Journal, I love this, has praised her writing as droll and crisp. And she modestly says this makes her feel like a pastry. So there's her humor coming into this. What makes Florence's work so powerful for me and so many people is that she really weaves together cutting edge research with deeply human stories, even her own stories. And whether she's investigating the science of awe or exploring how trees can lower urban crime rates or documenting how nature affects our brain waves, she never loses sight of the personal transformation that comes from all of this science. So today, she'll help us understand how nature can be our partner in shedding the armor we wear. She'll show us why increasingly our indoor and digital world is actually hurting us. And it isn't just, nature isn't just nice to have, it's essential for our survival. So please welcome the woman who's helped countless people like me understand the science behind what Wordsworth, Beethoven already knew, that nature holds the key to unlocking our highest potential. Florence Williams, thank you for being here. I know that was a very long introduction, but you've done so much that I just feel so connected to, from the brownies and your early days of like being immersed in nature, and then into shaping your career around the outdoors. But what I love that's happening now in our world is how science has finally caught up with basically ancient practices that are thousands and thousands of years old. And so, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Wow, that was quite an introduction, Rebecca. Thank
Super
you.
long, but there's so much to get into, and I've had so much fun. I will tell you, so we first talked in 2017. You did one of my favorite interviews of all time. I was on the Blood Road film tour. I just released a deeply personal documentary film about my own family trauma and childhood trauma. And similar to you, I had wanted to dig in to the questions of like, who was my dad? And so I took myself on a long bike ride, but you did a great interview about Blood Road. And I remember sitting in that hotel room in 2017, and I just sat there and I was like, this woman is so smart and so articulate and but so personable. And quite honestly, I'd never had anyone interview me in that way. I never had a woman interview me.
Hmm.
It's such a like brilliant and sensitive and smart way. And so I became a super fan that day and went right home and looked you up, found your book, The
Yeah.
Nature Fix. And then about a month ago, someone actually recommended your newest book, Heartbreak, to me because I've been going through a pretty long, it's no surprise now, I finally sort of come out about it, a long recovery from a concussion that led to 3 years of post-concussion symptoms. And I was really struggling with that. And someone sent me your book, Heartbreak. And while it's a different trauma, your breakup from a 25-year marriage, mine a concussion and sort of end of an identity of a competitive athlete, but it really resonated with me behind what you dug into the science of what happens to our bodies when we're hurting. And it was I gotta tell you, I love the book. I did the audio version and I just
Good.
loved hearing your voice and you going through it. And it was really therapeutic and helpful for me. So that is why you are here today, because of
Wow.
both of your books, our previous history, but also your newest book, Heartbreak.
Well, we've had a mutual fan club going for a while because I also distinctly remember that interview from 2017. And I thought the same of you, that you were so
Mm,
smart and you had just made this project that was so full of heart. I was very moved by your film and by that interview. And so it's
thank
just
you.
really nice. It's nice to sort of close the circle back up.
Well, it makes me think of your really personal exploration into your breakup, which is now very public. It's an award-winning book, and a long process that you've been going through. And I'm kind of wondering what that was like for you to sort of, in similar dig into a painful experience that most of us, when we have something really bad happen to us, we want to hide. And that's what I did with my
Yeah.
concussion for 2 years. I want to go to a hole and hide.
Yep.
But you didn't do that. You really kind of bared your soul and for years were reliving this experience. Was that good? Was that bad? Was it hard for you? Was it
Oh, yeah.
therapeutic?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of questions and topics wrapped up into that. I think you're right. I think most of us have an impulse when we're hurting to sort of not express it.
Hmm.
That's our culture. For many of us, we're taught not to be super expressive. And I think, it's interesting because I think for 25 years of my marriage, I also, I think, had internalized these messages of not being too much, not being too demanding, not being too expressive, not being needy.
Mm.
And I think people are much smarter about talking about relationships now, than when I got married in 1992. I was 25 years old. And I think it certainly led to the demise, probably in retrospect, of my marriage, that there wasn't a ton of open vulnerability and communication and expressiveness and all those things, that hopefully we're all learning a little bit more about now. But the interesting thing about having a huge trauma like a big divorce, after 25 years, like my entire adult life, and so much pain and it's just like impossible not to express it, I think, for me anyway. I felt like I couldn't just pretend it wasn't happening. It was so devastating. It sort of, broke down so many barriers. The house of cards like fell completely. And it taught me that I had to I wasn't going to heal, and I wasn't going to be able to sort of deal with these emotions unless I could express them and unless I could be vulnerable with other people, um, because I found so much comfort in talking to other people and
Yeah.
in learning from them. So that was almost the biggest lesson of the heartbreak, was kind
Yeah.
of to not hide anymore.
Uh, I mean, there's a lot there. So how did the seal sort of break, because you kind of said that you were in the earlier parts of your relationship, maybe you weren't as open as you
Right.
could have been. You weren't talking about the hard things. You're sort of like, oh, I'll just sweep that under the rug and, maybe it'll go away.
Yeah.
And I was really struck when I was listening to the audio version of Heartbreak is that you seem to have your shit so together. Like you didn't even get emotional. You're like, this was really hard. And, I was like, wow, she is expressing these really deep, painful experiences, but you sound like you have it so together now.
Wow, that's interesting. No, even reading the book for the
Hmm.
audio, was hard for me.
Was it?
Yeah. Because I did have to go back to some of those very painful scenes. I
Hmm.
didn't talk a lot about the marriage in the book or a lot about my ex, but I did talk about the breakup itself, how much
Yeah.
it hurt, what it did to my body. And yeah, I mean, even discussing it now, 8 years later, there's still a little bit of a constriction that I feel kind of in my chest talking about it. I think that when you write a memoir like that, or, it's really a scientific memoir or a science-based memoir, um, you have to have a little bit of distance from it. If
Mm.
it's too raw, it's a
Yeah.
bad book.
Yeah.
And so, fortunately, I took a number of years to write the book. And so some of the rawness, I think that was in the earlier drafts,
Mm.
got kind of edited out. I
Yeah.
do tend to write with some humor anyway. That's just my style. I was able to sort of bring a little more humor and a little more distance back into it in those later revisions.
Yeah.
So I think the time really helped a lot. But there was
That's
a lot of pain, a lot of pain there.
well, and there's probably some earlier edits or even journal entries where maybe it
Right,
isn't something you would read to the public.
right.
But I'm intrigued by the experience that you put this out into the world and that you took your own emotional pain and just said, here you go, everybody,
Yep,
have at it. And
yep,
it feels like in the Nature Fix, you were talking about all happy stuff and great things and the science behind like I actually lit a candle today, a scented candle, because you talk about our all of our senses, how they are, nature and all the things we're smelling, we're seeing, we're hearing, how those are impacting us positively. But in Heartbreak, you're talking about all of the negative impacts of our things that happen to us externally. And so it's sort of like you wrote a real happy, positive book, and then you wrote a book of very similar of how external impacts affect our body. And I was really I'm intrigued by both sides of it because I was amazed at how, like you said just now, my heart clenched when I even think about it, and how we have these physical reactions that I think most of us, especially strong, high achieving people, we sort of like maybe push that aside a little bit. Like,
yeah.
oh, I'm not feeling that. I don't have time to feel that
Right,
right
right.
now.
I have to put my head down and sort of get
Yeah.
stuff done. Yeah.
Do you feel like after writing about all of sort of the writing Heartbreak and writing about the physical impact of trauma on your body, do you feel like now that you are more attuned to that and maybe not blocking those feelings?
Absolutely. Yeah. I feel like my heartbreak experience really taught me how to feel. And it also taught me, not just, it wasn't just the negative influences of externalities that I wrote about. It was also how we can't really heal unless we also are open to the beauty and feeling the full range of emotions. So, by being so kind of taken down to the studs and
Mhm.
having to acknowledge my pain, I also learned, I think, how to have a bigger range of um, ability to see beauty, to cultivate awe. That became a big lesson of the book, that one of the ways to heal heartbreak is through cultivating beauty and awe. And that's not a message I think that we hear very much in kind of how to get over heartbreak books or
Yeah.
even how to get over trauma books. Um, or not, and I don't think, and I think that's the wrong expression. We don't really get over trauma, right? But we learn to kind of grow with it and grow through it. And for me, that happens through the vulnerability. It happens through opening your heart and not just closing it. So, I felt like through the heartbreak, I had these big scars and fissures and holes in my heart. But ultimately, I feel like it was through those kinds of fissures that I was also able to see what was alive, around me and in me. And that was a
I
process.
think of this kind of stuff as these sort of internal injuries or traumas that happen to us. If I put them in the athlete lens of like a physical injury, and I said this after Blood Road, like we never talked about my dad. We didn't talk about the Vietnam War. We didn't, I mean, we didn't talk about the trauma of it. We just said, "Oh, your dad was a great guy," and he liked to play music, but we didn't talk about the real hard stuff. And when we came around to Blood Road and we're doing the film and having an interview, my mom was being interviewed about like what happened when that day, and it was really like reopening this super painful wound but it hadn't healed right. It was never going to heal until we sort of broke that bone again and then realigned, like you say, there was healthy tissue around that. But there was this broken bone that was like the arm was
Yeah.
never going to work until it got opened up again, decades later.
Yeah.
So I love what you're saying, that you kind of had to excavate and dig in there to sort of heal the wound, but look for the good stuff around it. Does that
Yeah,
make
I mean,
sense?
I was so helped, I think, by the scientists, that I talked to. Um, and one, Helen Fisher, sadly, the late Helen Fisher, she writes a lot about the neurochemicals of falling in love, and sort of the chemistry of love. But she has also looked at what happens on the other side. And she has like scanned the brains of dumped people, one of the few who's looked at our brains. And she could help explain to me kind of the physiology of what was going on in my nervous system, having felt sort of abandoned, right, and rejected in this broad sense. It's one of the deepest emotional human wounds, that we have, this feeling of being sort of rejected or cast out. And then I visited these sociologists and psychologists at the University of Utah. And one of them was just filled with all these terrible statistics. He was like, look, people who are divorced are like the worst off. They have the highest rate of morbidity and disease, and they die faster. They have like this higher rate of death than even people who've never been married, because you've gone through, the trauma of this divorce. And the statistics aren't great. Like people who go through heartbreak really do have higher risk of heart disease and cardiovascular disease and dementia. It's just bad news. But then I went down the hall and met this other psychologist. Her name's Dr. Paula Williams, and she studies resilience. She studies what is it that makes people who have gone through hard times survive them well. And she's the only person, I ever really talked to who said, we think we know the secret to resilience, and it's one you've never heard. And it's this ability to notice beauty and appreciate it. And it just made me sort of made my spine tingle to hear that. It made me sit forward in my chair. I had already written the Nature Fix. I knew I was someone who was moved by nature and the natural world. And, she kind of convinced me that we can become more prone to appreciating awe. We can learn how to do that. It's one of the few personality traits, openness, one of the few traits that we can actually move the needle on. We're not going to really change how neurotic we are or how conscientious we are, but we can potentially change how open we are to the world around us. And so that became kind of my motivating force for the next 2 years while I was writing the book and also just on my own personal recovery. And so I wanted to just find awe, wherever I could. And that as a guiding force, I think it's a really important message, that I wanted to share.
It's when you shared the statistics in Heartbreak of divorced people and this and that, or single people, and I was thinking about my divorced or single friends. I'm like, I could never share this book with them. Like, it will
No,
totally, like,
no.
well, they didn't. And then you kind of came to the other statistics, positive,
Yeah.
that we can affect change. I'm interested to know, like, why do, these are ancient concepts that have been proven through religion and all sorts of art and everything and creativity. Why did you even needed the scientific proof, even though you'd written a whole book on nature and includes awe? You still needed this researcher to say, no, you can be your own healer, and this is how. Like, why do we need to have that proof? Why
Well,
can't we just believe it?
look at the life we're living now, right? Most of us are spending, 23 hours a day inside. We're plugged into our devices. We're looking at screens. We've got our heads down. Most of us need a reminder that we
Mhm.
actually feel really great when we're in nature.
Yeah.
So many of us haven't had enough time in nature to even figure that out. Or when we are in nature, we are listening to music on our
Mm.
headphones, or we're trying to clock our heart rate. We've got a destination in mind. Um, we're distracted even when we're outside.
Yeah.
Um,
And we're trying to hit a certain number of steps, and we're
exactly.
recording it, and it's a to-do item on our list for the day in a
We're
different.
multitasking in our brains. Our brains are now wired to do that after living the lives that we've lived, since the smartphone was invented, 2007 or whatever. And I know too from the data that we undervalue how good we feel outside. And there have been studies that show this. So, a psychologist will take a group of students and say, okay, half of you walk across this park to this other building on campus, and the other half of you walk through these underground tunnels to get there. And how happy do you think you'll feel, or how relaxed do you think you'll feel in each scenario? And the college students undervalue how great they'll feel walking outside, and they overvalue how fine it will be to walk underground. So, I mean, there are small examples like that. We just don't really pay attention,
Yeah.
and we don't value how good we'll feel. So then, if you think about how far removed we are from the awe that we used to feel all the time, right? So we used to live outside as a species. We saw the Milky Way every single night. We sat around a fire and sang and danced.
Yeah.
We came face to face or eyeball to eyeball with wild creatures, like on a daily basis. Um, Even though life was stressful when we were living in the jungle or on the veldt, in the Pleistocene, life was stressful. But we had these ways to recover from it that were just built into our environment,
Yeah.
by looking up at the Milky Way at night, seeing the sunset. We just don't do that anymore. And
Yeah.
so that's why we don't have the sort of natural built-in recovery that
Mhm.
we used to have, and why we have to kind of work harder to create it.
Well, and everyone's looking for an app or a supplement to take or a happy pill, basically, when the happy pill, physically and emotionally, is walking in nature or going outside. And there are so many studies now coming up
So
about all
many.
of that,
Yeah.
that I mean, I really hope people start to listen, because I'm scared for humanity, to be honest with you, because like you said, so few people, kids especially, get to go outside. And I think about, we were both brownies, Girl Scouts, brownies when we were kids. And it sounds like your dad and my mom, like, we just went camping. We
Yeah.
didn't have a lot of money, and she took us camping and we slept in the dirt, and I loved it. And
Yeah.
she sent me to off to camps in the summer that were, where we'd make art and swim in the river. And that has been really impactful in my life, and yours as well. And we've been able to shape our lives in that way, but that is starting to go away for kids, and or adults who did experience that. They're kind of blowing it off as an adult, going, well, I need to go outside and walk. I think for me that I kind of relearned this lesson during my concussion recovery as well. We moved out of town, 45 minutes away from Ketchum Sun Valley area, which is also not a big town, but it was feeling too busy. And during my recovery, we moved 45 minutes away into a remote part that has no cell phone coverage.
Mm.
Once I leave my house, there is no cell phone
Wow.
coverage. And I think it was a real eye opener that this is really good for my healing,
Yeah.
is that I have my phone to take pictures, but there are no bings or notifications, or there was nothing coming up. And when my brain was healing, it was really sort of on hyperdrive, that overstimulation of
Right.
things that we're getting, because my brain was injured. And so I was sort of like, I can't have the
Right.
phone on, I can't have all these things on. But when we have a healthy brain, or we're not injured, we ignore all that input, like you're saying, and we just sort of blow it off.
Yeah, and the act of filtering all that stimulation out is actually very taxing. And I
Hmm.
didn't realize this, but there are studies, showing that it's actually hard work for our brain. We have to put in all this glycose, and we have to actually use our brains a lot to just filter stuff out. And so
Hmm.
at the end of the day in modern life, we're kind of tired and cranky in ways
Hmm.
that we don't even realize.
Yeah.
Um,
I get real cranky now when my brain is
yeah,
overstimulated.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but we all do,
Yeah.
but it's especially true for people with brain injuries. And I've met people who, for example, I met a guy who had a TBI who was working as a raft guide. And he said, so he was living outside, every single day, for like 5 months. And he said it was so good for his healing. And it's
Yeah.
it's good for all of us to be in an environment where we actually want to open up our senses. We want to hear the birds. We want to see the light on the canyon wall. We want to feel the breeze, because it's a pleasant outdoor experience and it's what our brains were built to process. So our perceptual systems were evolved to take in information from the natural world, to be able to look at a field and a forest and kind of understand what we're seeing. Our brains naturally go to this comfortable space when we're in an outdoor, natural, pleasant environment. Whereas, like I moved from Colorado to Washington, D.C. while I was writing the Nature Fix,
Mhm.
right before I started. And, just navigating those traffic circles. There's so many traffic circles. If I was listening to the radio, and then I would have to navigate one of these traffic circles where I'm trying not to run people over, on their scooters, and, cars are coming in, whatever. I have no idea what was actually on the radio, right? I wasn't able to hear any of it because I have to focus on the stimulation that's in front of me that's going to help me survive and other people survive. But I think that's a good example of how we shut down when we're in modern life, and so many of our senses just shut down. And that's not the way our human bodies really want to proceed through the world. They want to take stuff in. They want to feel it. And we thrive when our senses are actually experiencing the beautiful things around us.
Well, and I think people kind of like, yeah, I've gone on that vacation or that camping trip, and people understand that intuitively. What I kind of love about what you articulated, especially in heartbreak, is that it not just feels good, it's actually your physiology is healthier.
That's
Like
right.
heart disease, all sorts of things that are happening, dementia. If we don't actually go outside and experience awe or nature, it's actually making us unhealthier. So it's a flip from not only does it feel good and, oh, it's nice, I should go do this, but can you talk a little bit about what is happening in the body when
Yeah.
you go outside and move, and
Yeah.
from a trauma point of view, but also from just sort of a feel good point of view, but from a health point of view,
Yeah,
physical health?
absolutely. I mean, I think it's interesting that we now know from big epidemiological studies that people who live in cities, and especially people who live in parts of cities that don't have green space, are at
Hmm.
much higher risk of mental health disease. They're at
Hmm.
higher risk of schizophrenia. They have higher rates of anxiety. They need more anxiety medication. They need more cardiovascular medication. Um, and so what's happening is that they're kind of on edge. They're living in this overstimulating environment. We know that their amygdalas, which are the fear centers of their brains, are getting a lot more activated. They're larger, showing up larger on functional MRIs. And so their bodies are just naturally sort of putting out more stress hormones. There's more cortisol. There's more neuroepinephrine, all of these neurotransmitters that are kind of gearing us up to survive some kind of assault, right? Just by living in a city.
Just like
And
defensiveness, just like
yeah,
really
we're like
start.
almost it's like a subtle state of threat. We're
Hmm.
sort of like ready to fight or flee or do whatever we need to do because
Hmm.
there are all these loud noises. There's like these engines and these garbage trucks and you know, um too many people in a crowded space and many ways that we just feel a little bit on edge. And when we go out into a natural environment, again, a pleasant natural environment where there's not, like a hurricane or something, um, our brains just subconsciously relax. Our nervous system can relax. Like we feel safe. We see green things and we know, okay, I'm going to be able to find food. We see clean blue water. People love water. People love looking at water. It's very like across many, many cultures. People feel soothed by looking at oceans or lakes or rivers because, again, sort of subconsciously, we know that we can find clean water. Um, when we hear birds sing, there's a deep part of our brain that knows everything is okay in the world. Like there's no predator right there. There's no big storm coming. When we hear birds, it's like everything's okay, like in this moment. Um,
What do you do if you're in New York City though, and you live in an urban environment and you can't go outside and look at the stars at night or hear birds every day? And you
yeah.
talk about sort of micro dosing, awe and nature experiences, but how do you do that if you're not in Colorado, Idaho, or a place that it is readily accessible?
Well, that's what I had to learn by living in Washington D.C. I had to learn how to find these kind of, as you say, microdosing or nearby nature, which we
Mhm.
also know from the studies is actually incredibly important. So people who live closer to parks or closer to trees, if they live on streets that have more street trees, they have better cardiovascular outcomes. Their health is better if they live near green space. And this has been shown across many, many very large studies, especially in Europe, where there's great sort of health data that they can overlay on maps. And then they can adjust all this for socioeconomic status. So it's not just that wealthier people who have better medical care can afford to live near a park. It's that when you take people from the same socioeconomic class or background, you can actually dig down into how close they do live to street trees or parks, and look at their health records. And we just see over and over again that there's this incredible, at least correlation with these stress mediated diseases, things like cancer, respiratory disease, stroke, and cardiovascular disease. It goes on and on. Even ADHD, healthy birth weight babies. Um, Much better outcomes for and lower rates of mortality. People are living longer when they live closer to green space. So it's
I mean, I hope the urban planners are listening,
that's
but
right. That's right.
yeah,
That's why we need
yeah,
everyone to have
yeah,
access to parks. And
yeah.
it's why, you mentioned I'm on the board of Trust for Public Land, and one of their great missions is that there's this belief that everyone should be able to live within a 10-minute walk of a park.
Mm.
And 100 million Americans right now do not live within a 10-minute walk of a park. So we need our parks to be safe. We need them to be high quality. Ideally, they should have different species in them because it seems to be that biodiversity is also linked to well-being in humans, which is really interesting. There's something about us. We know when we're hearing lots of different kinds of birds, that even makes us feel less anxious in some subtle ways.
I mean, can we do this with houseplants and recordings and,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. Human-made noises like airplanes, low-flying jets, of which there are many in Washington, diesel trucks, rumbling around if we live close to freeways. All of these things put us on edge, and we know this from studies. And so if we can even wear noise canceling headphones, at times, pump
yeah,
in birdsong into our offices, put our desks next to natural light coming in through the windows. Houseplants absolutely seem to be linked to higher well-being, greater acts of generosity. We are sort of nicer, better people when
yeah.
we're in rooms with more houseplants.
God, that's so cool. I know from your book Heartbreak that you know all this nature stuff, but yet and the nature fix and how healthy it is for us from trauma and on a physical aspect, but you sort of didn't, it wasn't really a turning point for you. You were going in nature, you're immersing in nature. You're like, I know all this stuff from my first book and it's still not working. Like,
Yeah.
you went on this long solo river expedition and you came back from that still not feeling healed. You thought it was going to be this real turning point in your recovery and it just wasn't. So what was missing
Yeah.
in that huge nature fix that you're like, okay, I know what I need to do? And it kind of didn't work the way you thought it would.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting drilling down into that. I spent I guess it was 12 days on a river trip solo where I canoed and pack rafted part of a long part, really long part of the Green River. It's like 200 miles of the Green River, that flows through mostly through Utah. And I wanted to do that because I had never been on my own. I met my ex-husband when I was 18.
Yeah.
And we got married when I was 25. I felt very anxious about being alone. Like it
Hmm.
really freaked me out. Like, am I going to die alone? What happens if I get sick? I felt that was part of why I actually got sick after the divorce. We didn't really talk about that, but I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease because I was so anxious and fearful, as a lot of people are when they lose a spouse or, have a major loss of an attachment bond or go through some other trauma, right? Where the future is unknown and you're scared. It's not great for your health to be that on edge for so long.
Yeah.
Um, so I felt like it was going to be really important for me to kind of learn how to paddle my own boat,
Hmm.
in this literal and metaphorical sense. I felt like I needed to figure out how to be more brave. And I know, Rebecca, this is something that you think about a lot when you teach women about mountain biking, and in the sports that you do. And there's a bravery gap between men and women, and this is documented that women are just not conditioned to sort of like go out there and take care of themselves, right? When we get hurt when we're little girls, like our parents come running over to us and they go, "Oh my God, are you okay? Maybe you shouldn't have been doing that." Whereas little boys are like, they're conditioned differently, right? They're told to like get over it, pick themselves back up. So a lot of it, I think, is cultural conditioning. But for whatever reasons, I needed to access some bravery. And so that was also part of what was motivating this big river trip. I also wanted to experience more awe, more beauty, have more stillness, finally learn how to meditate, all of these things. And I think all of that happened on this river trip. I did gain a lot of self-confidence. I gained more bravery. I really pulled it off. I survived. Um, I learned how to meditate. I did a lot of deep reflection. But at the end of the day, we actually met, I worked with a psychoneuroimmunologist at UCLA, and we took blood samples from my white blood cells um, before and after this wilderness trip, and at various time points after the divorce, because I was documenting these gene expression changes in my nervous system over time. So after the wilderness trip, my white blood cells did not look better. Like I still had these markers of stress. And what he called this scientist I worked with, what he called basically markers of loneliness. We know that people who feel lonely have worse gene expression for health. So because their bodies are on edge, because we're not, as a human species, as individuals, we're not really supposed to be alone. We're in a threat state when we're alone. That's just the way our bodies are designed, because we're a social species and we feel safer generally when we're in groups. And so I think what happened was, on that river trip, I was alone. And when you're alone in the wilderness, as you have to be on your game. You have to tie the boat in right every single night, or you're going to lose your boat. You can't cut yourself. You can't accidentally light the beach on fire. You can't lose your life jacket. You can't get sick, so you are actually alone in the wilderness, which is exactly what the metaphor was of my divorce, of feeling like I was alone in the wilderness. So it helped me psychologically. That river trip helped me psychologically in some ways, but it did not help me physiologically. And I think that's interesting. If I had done that trip with my best friends, or with people I felt safe with, I think it would have been a very different result, actually, in my white blood cells.
It's such a good concept of you don't need to go into nature to elicit fear in yourself.
Right.
And, I get that a lot. People are like, why do you go do these crazy things? And in many cases, I'm more comfortable there. Like Blood Road was a good example. My teammate Huen, who's a Vietnamese cyclist, she grew up in Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi and urban environment. And we did 1,200 miles through the jungle, and she was, didn't really know how to camp, didn't really know how to navigate. And she was terrified out there many times. And I was like, oh, this is great. And people are like, weren't you afraid of Bengal tigers and all that and snakes? And I was like, no. And the moment we started to get towards Ho Chi Minh City, which is massive, she just clicked into her element, and I was terrified. I was like, get me behind you so we can navigate the traffic. And she took the lead.
Wow.
But she
Yeah.
was more stressed in the nature environment.
Right.
She learned a lot, and she was with me. But it's a good point that you don't have to go into nature to terrify yourself, or someone learning to ski or a mountain bike, and that's a lot of your exposure and my exposure to get people outside is so they feel safe and enjoy it, and they aren't on edge, because then it sort of defeats the purpose until you have the skill set to go a little deeper into nature.
That's right. And I think we have to think about that a lot these days with kids who haven't had the nature access.
Right.
But we understand that if they can learn to feel comfortable in nature, it will actually be this great gift for their psychological and physical health for the rest of their lives. Right. And so how do you take a kid who's potentially fearful of being in the wilderness, and help them feel safe there? And a big part of it is the group.
Yeah.
Kids are so responsive to their peers. And if they can go with their friends, or if they can feel comfortable and safe with a group, like these Girl Scout camps, that we both grew up going to. I mean, that's a wonderful way, I think, to gradually help people feel more comfortable outside.
Well, and not just kids, but adults
That's right.
of any age.
That's right.
I'm 56, and I take a lot of people, and especially women who maybe were caregivers, they didn't have sports as kids, and they're getting into sports in their 40s and 50s. And so all this stuff that's great for kids is great for everybody.
Absolutely. And in fact, there are studies showing that middle-aged women are especially helped by access and exposure to nature.
I've seen it so many times where they're given this confidence and sort of lease on oh my gosh, I can do this. Kind of like you paddling your own boat and, going out without another person as your guide, or your husband as your guide.
Right.
You kind of went and So you gained that confidence, but yeah, it was interesting that it still didn't manifest in your physical body as far as healing from the trauma
That's
of
right.
the
Yeah,
split.
it was a big disappointment because then I was like, oh dang, I have to keep writing this book and I have to do all these
Like,
other things now to try to feel
I
better.
mean, yeah, you got to keep being your human guinea pig, which is so amazing. You did talk about there were a couple things that you've honed in on that were really pivotal in your recovery. Two of those things, you've mentioned a lot, and I'm a big fan of Dacher Keltner's work as well,
Yeah.
and read that book during my concussion recovery. But you also
So
talked
he's
about
an awe researcher at
yes,
UC
yeah, talk
Berkeley.
about him a little
Yeah.
bit. I mean, he's got a great book. He researched the science of awe, which,
Yeah,
and
he's a big character in my book. Yeah.
he outlines, as you know, sort of I think it's the 8 ways that humans can access awe. So that was really pivotal for your recovery. Is that right?
It was. So, just to kind of go over what some of those 8 ways are, nature, obviously. But a lot of people around the world feel awe from other people.
Yeah,
So I think the number one cause of awe or pathway to awe was watching other people perform acts of courage,
yeah.
or acts of kindness, or selflessness.
He calls it moral beauty. So
Yes, moral
witnessing
beauty.
moral beauty is the number one way to access awe in humans. That's proven. And
That's
everyone
right.
always thinks nature is the first one. It's actually third.
Yeah, that's right.
But yeah,
That's right.
moral beauty is seeing people like do amazing things. It could be somebody helping somebody, and you're like, oh, that's amazing.
Exactly. And then, there's visual awe
Hmm.
from looking at art, for example. There's awe from music. There's awe from big questions in science, like thinking about string theory or the universe. We feel awe from big ideas or big concepts. We feel awe by witnessing births and deaths, these kind of like really big life transitions. I mean, basically, the definition of awe, as he describes it, is this kind of loss of focus on yourself and feeling connected to something huge around you, whether it's an idea or a person or this music, or nature, that we feel like we're part of these systems of life. And I think that that's kind of a neat way to think about it. And so, if you're feeling, traumatized or depressed or whatever it is, and you need a dose of awe, it doesn't have to be through the natural world. Like go to a museum, go to a choral concert, or sing, with other people. Singing and dancing is another way to feel awe. There's so many ways. And I think just even finding these micro dose, you know, little items of awe. If you go on a walk and you look at a blossom, or hear a bird song and just focus on that element of beauty for a few breath cycles, just to sit with the beauty. Um, I participated in a 6-week study where we did that, where we went out once or twice a day. We found these like micro moments of awe. And the researchers found by the end of the study that people who did that had a 30% reduction in symptoms of anxiety and depression and physical pain.
And I want to keep reinforcing that the stuff that we're talking about, yes, it makes you feel better emotionally, but there is a direct physical health
Yes.
benefit, cardiovascularly and all sorts of things that you've shown in your books, that there is a direct physical impact from trauma, but also from being able to be your own healer and find a little bit of awe in your everyday
I
life.
think one of the lessons for me there was, in order to heal from emotional or physical trauma, we need to find pockets of calm where
Mhm.
our bodies are not putting out these survival stress hormones.
Mm,
Um, so we need to feel safe. We need to feel safe in
yeah.
order to heal. And I think that that's a really interesting lesson. And if we can't feel that way all the time, we can feel it during certain pockets. And hopefully those pockets will sort of build up and we'll be able to sleep better. We'll be able to digest our food better. Our cells will be able to sort of recycle, and clean up better. all of these things
Yeah.
that need to happen.
There was one other pivotal moment that Docker talks about in his book, is also an access to awe, that you said was finally a transformational letting go of the divorce and the split up, and that was psychedelic assisted therapy.
Yes, and that was Dr. Keltner who said, well, I guess I said to him, do you think I should try mushrooms? If I'm looking for a big awe. And he really thought about it. And he told me about his own parents' divorce
Mhm.
that traumatized him when he was a kid. Anyway, he said, yeah, you should try it. And I had never done that before. And so I worked with a therapist, and I did some psilocybin mushrooms um, in this therapeutic setting. And I think, you have to be really careful when they're deciding whether it's going to be right for you. I mean, there are all these factors to consider, but it ended up being, actually, I think, in retrospect, really one of the most healing and helpful things that I did.
Why do you think that is?
I think a lot of it was this awe. I did experience big awe. I had a kind of, quote, mystical experience under this large dose where I completely lost my sense of ego, right? I was no longer kind of a self with a capital S.
Mhm.
I saw myself as a filament of light swimming with all these other beautiful filaments of light in the universe. I felt like I was part of this beautiful kind of life force, right? I felt this sense of oneness that people talk about, who are deep into, any kind of spiritual, mystical tradition. Um, I also, when I did regain a little bit of a sense of self during this experience, I saw myself as a tree.
Mm.
And I had this very beautiful and healing image of how I was about to grow, in this very beautiful way into the light, all by myself. And I
Yeah.
actually had this vision, just to get a little more into it. I did have this vision of my ex as a strangler vine, wrapped around my trunk, right? And the fact that I was having a hard time letting go of this marriage, really, and separating from him, I saw visually that it was constricting my ability to grow and to be a beautiful tree. And so, like, I just imagined myself like pulling this vine away from my trunk. And I think I actually even did some of this like with my hands, where I was like pulling this vine away. And I said to this vine, I know you are a part of me. We grew up together, but you can't strangle my trunk anymore.
Mm.
You can go like hang out down there by my roots, but you can't strangle my trunk. And I can't tell you how just liberating that was, how it made me less afraid of the future. It made me more confident that I could still have a beautiful life. And there are a lot of studies showing that people who, for example, are facing a terminal illness,
Mhm.
who have these psychedelic experiences, they let go of fear.
Yeah.
They just feel like whatever happens is okay and it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And those feelings, those lessons that I gained from that experience have really stayed. They've stayed with me.
There's a lot of really cool studies of neuroscience of like what is happening in the brain and the amygdala, and when you do psychedelic assisted therapy in the right setting, is that there is a brain chemistry change that allows us to kind of strip away our protective layers of like, I can't do this. This is the story I've written about myself. This is my fear of that. It sort of just allows your more limbic brain, your just yourself, to sort of be a little bit more open. I think about it a lot. I also, it was very pivotal for me to do psychedelic assisted therapy in
Mm,
my concussion recovery.
mm.
It really helped me turn a corner. And I compare it a lot to sort of like lucid dreaming, or what is in your subconscious. It's already there, but you just get a little gateway, a little opening to look at what's already there and be like, oh,
What were the big
this is part
lessons?
inside me. This is my brain, you
Well,
know?
I'm curious, what were the big lessons for you in your experience?
Similar to you, in a letting go of attention,
Mm,
of I'm this professional athlete, I've got
right.
everything figured out, this is who I'm supposed to be. And so a letting go of a lot of that armor and a lot of that structure, and also fear of, well, if I'm not that, then
Right.
who am I?
It's
And
terrifying. Yeah.
yeah, and there was a sense of safety and community. I saw people dead and alive who were part of my world, and like, yeah, they are part of my world. And so it was nothing that maybe I didn't know. That it was nothing that I didn't know. It was things that I wasn't allowing myself to access or to feel, and definitely a big openness of like, okay,
Yeah. There's a
and
lot of
an understanding.
acceptance. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
an understanding of why I behave in certain ways, looking at my
Mhm.
history and losing my dad, and oh,
Mhm.
well, this is why I've been real protective. And this is
Yes.
why, and okay, I'm safe now and I don't need to do that anymore. So it was a really understanding of myself, and therapy in general has been amazing for me. Talk
Yeah.
therapy,
Yeah. Same.
you
Yeah.
know, yeah, and you've experienced that as well. And I think about your book was really your most recent book was really a gigantic therapeutic session for you and for other people. It's a gift that you basically became a scientific experiment on grief.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I think if it helps other people feel like they can be more open
Hmm.
about their grief, about their wounds, about their
Yeah.
trauma, I will feel like I've done a service if I've helped some people feel like this is normal part of life, this kind of pain. We all go through it. Um, and if we can kind of learn to really connect authentically with one another through these kinds of situations, it's very healing.
Yeah, I mean, of the happiness studies, the longest running happiness study, connection is one of
Yes.
the most important things um for people's long-term health and happiness. And like we talked about earlier, you often feel like strong, accomplished people. We can't tell somebody we're suffering, and that actually is doing a physical and emotional disservice for us if we don't open up.
That's right. And I think, we have lots of ways of connecting these days, but some of them are not really authentic ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in fact, we have fewer and fewer opportunities for that kind of authentic connection all the time.
So I want to ask you, I mean, I'm so happy to be connected back to you again in your work. I want to ask you, from this sort of shift from your trauma and then into everything you've learned about yourself and grief and healing, how how have you shifted? How do you approach your relationships now?
That's a great question. I feel like one of the things I am much more likely to do now is admit failure
Mhm.
or admit flaws, um, accept my flaws, accept other people's flaws. I have lost all perfectionism. Thank goodness.
Yeah.
Gosh, what a relief.
Even in your writing and your work?
Yeah, I would say so, definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
awesome.
I think it's actually really it's kind of an art killer to be a perfectionist. I mean, a lot of
Mhm.
people are paralyzed by perfectionism and they don't feel like they can write or work.
I
Yeah.
can relate to that. Yeah.
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 Yeah, it can be paralyzing. So and I, as a mother too, I saw some of those tendencies in my daughter, to be a little bit of a perfectionist, as so many women are. I mean, we are. I think there's so much pressure for us to please everybody all the time and to do great at everything. Um, and so I have really made an effort to sort of model my flaws. It's like, oh gosh, I really screwed that up. I think that's one of the best things we can do as kind of parents, and probably as friends too. Not try to be perfect and to own that. And that's huge, I think, in my relationships as far as self-acceptance,
Yeah.
and accepting flaws in other people because Lord knows we all have them.
I mean, yeah, what a powerful journey. I mean, do you think that growth only comes from grief? Did you have to go through such a trauma to get there?
Boy, that is a great question. So many. philosophers and philosophical and spiritual traditions will say yes.
Mm-hmm.
Suffering is the path to wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
It's certainly the path to empathy. And if
Mm-hmm.
we believe that the core message here of our time in this world is about love, then we have to really understand empathy,
Mm-hmm.
and we have to understand suffering,
Yeah.
unfortunately. But, the good news is that there is another side. We do come out
Yeah.
of these terrible periods of pain and grief into something that makes us better people and better able to love each other. And I think that is the message that we sort of need to keep reminding ourselves of.
Yeah. The sun does always rise in the morning.
It does.
Yeah. Since this is called What's the Rush podcast, I mean, Florence, I could talk to you forever. But we'll close with the last question. This podcast is about, uncovering our own masterpiece, being a student for life. And even though you've had this massive growth experience, what is it that you are working on now to still maybe release your grip on, or slow down, or let go of? What are you working on right now for that?
Yeah, as a woman in my 50s, I am really working on letting go of trying to be all things to all people.
Mm-hmm.
I am letting go of the compulsion to sort of work all the time and identify through that. I am right now spending a lot of time skiing. It's a pretty good ski year, snow year here in Colorado. I'm outside a lot. I know that I just need to be there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm
I
doing.
love that you're let going. I mean, you have such an identity in your work, and you've
Yeah,
done such great. I mean, you have this body of work that is incredible. But I love that you're, balancing that and having that not being just the myopic version of Florence, the science writer, and that's all you do. You're a
yeah,
lot more than
yeah.
that.
I really want to be a healthy person physically.
Mhm.
I want to have a good quality of life. And when you get to be in your 50s, you start thinking about these things.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for joining me, and we will include all of your amazing work in the show notes and things. But personally, I'm really glad to be connected with you again, because your books have really helped me too. So you've already achieved your goal. If your book helped one,
Yes.
it already helped me. So Heartbreak is amazing for anyone going through something hard right now. And thank you for sharing that with the world.
Well, and thank you so much for your work and what you're doing. And I'm just really honored to be a part of this podcast project of yours. So thank you
You're
so
one of
much.
our first guests on this amazing new adventure.
I'm so thrilled about it. It's great
I
to
am
be here.
too. And I look forward to an actual outdoor adventure with you sometime in the future.
Good. Let's do it. Thanks,
Thanks, Florence.
Rebecca.
Hey, it's a long and dusty road and a hot and heavy load. Folks I meet ain't always kind. Some are bad, some are good, some have done the best they could. Some have tried to ease my troubling mind. And I can't help but wonder where I'm bound, where I'm bound. Can't help but wonder where I'm bound.